Today, I chose the story of this person simply because most of us can easily identify with him. The way he feels about himself and about his situations in life. You will know later on why I have chosen this man. Like him, we see the obvious. We see the natural things that our eyes can see. We see the situations like hardship, difficulties. We see our weaknesses and limitations. We see the problems. And we never see God who is able to overcome and sustain us in the midst of difficulty. Some of us, like this man, even thought of God abandoning us. Maybe in our hearts we're saying, Lord, if you are with me, why am I in this difficult situation? Can God use an ordinary man with weaknesses and limitations to fulfill God's purpose and calling for himself and to accomplish extraordinary tasks for God and his people? If you're familiar, I'm talking about this person. The name of this person is Gideon. As I continue to read the Bible, I found out that Gideon was really a man whom God called. Gideon was actually the 6th judge in the time of the judges, and later on I will explain. He delivered the people of God. He was called by God, and he responded and struggled to obey. One step at a time. He didn't realize that in his one step at a time, obedience to God, that he was accomplishing extraordinary, great things for God, that if he will only look at himself, it would be impossible for him really to accomplish those things. And God, I want you to look at God behind the scene as how God encouraged this man in every step of the way. There's a truth that is worth emulating, that his life is reflecting a one step at a time obedience. And you will notice that God is not calling us to commit for 100 steps. God is not calling us to say, Anak, give me 500 commitment steps in obedience. No. God, if you will find in the scripture, He will just, for God, it is one step obedience is enough. And you will notice as you follow God one step at a time, and you follow God, later you will realize, if you look back after several years or months or time, you will look back and you will realize how far you have gone with God in that one step at a time obedience. Our obedience to God leads to encouragement, and encouragement leads to greater obedience still. You will find out that when you obey God in one step at a time obedience, God encourages you. And that encouragement leads to another obedience. And our obedience would encourage us, and that encouragement leads you to another step of obedience. This is how God demonstrated these words of encouragement and how He encouraged this timid and coward person. The name was Gideon. Now, just to give you a background about the book of Judges, before we step into the text, if you will notice, if you have read your Old Testament and you're familiar of the Old Testament story, you know, God delivered His people from the bondage of Egypt. God led them into the wilderness, and they crossed the Jordan River during the time of Joshua to conquer Canaan, specifically the city of Jericho. So that's the book of Joshua. After the book of Joshua is the book of Judges. Now, the book of Judges is finally that the people of God have settled in to the land flowing with milk and honey that is called the Promised Land, the Canaan. So while they were in Canaan, God gave them rules after rule, or law and reminders. Do not worship the gods of the Canaanites. I am your God. I am the one who delivered you out of Egypt. That's why there is a book called Deuteronomy. You know, the word Deuteronomy is the repetition of the law, because a new generation will enter the Promised Land. The forefathers who died in the wilderness, they were the one who received the first recipient of the 10 Commandments. So the one that will enter now Canaan was the new generation. That's why they had to repeat the 10 Commandments, the law, the Torah, or the Old Testament. Now, these people entered Canaan, and again, you will find out that in the book of Judges, before God would raise a king, kasi later on they would realize, Lord, bakit ang Egypt may king? Why Mesopotamia has a king? Lord, give us a king. And then God would give them a king. But prior to the rule of the king, God would raise rulers called judges. Now, See, Gideon is the sixth judge. Before him, there were several judges that were raised by God to deliver the people of Israel. Now, before I read verse 1 of chapter 6, just to give you a background of a cycle that has been going on in the lives of Israel. This is a very important cycle that I want you to remember. First portion of the cycle is disobedience. You will notice if you read the Old Testament, the people of God would always disobey God. Meaning they would sin and rebel. They would forget about the commandments of God. They would forget about the instructions of the Lord. Do not worship any other gods. And they would find themselves worshiping and attracted to the fallen gods. After the rebellion, God would now be disciplining His people. And the form of discipline that God would usually do in the Old Testament, if again you will recall, is as if God would cover His own people, but because of the disobedience of His people, He would lift His hand and allow the neighboring ancient Near Eastern countries, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, God would allow them to attack and invade or raid Israel. That's how God would punish His own people, just to remind them. After some time, when they are in suffering and in difficulty, the people of Israel would learn to call upon God. They would repent, and they would realize, Lord, forgive us, Yahweh, now we will return to you. Because God is the God of mercy, He would raise a deliverer. Remember the time of Egypt? They were crying out, Lord, deliver us from the Egyptian, and God raised Moses. Now, at this time, God would give them a deliverance. Now, the cycle continue. When the people of God has been delivered, now they're enjoying peace, then they're enjoying abundance and prosperity. The tendency, they will forget about God and fall again into disobedience. And because they disobey again, God would discipline them again. So that's the cycle. Now, when you're reading the book of Judges, and I would advise you to read, there's beautiful stories there that we can draw some lessons upon our lives. Walang pagkakaiba po sa buhay natin. But when there's abundance, the tendency is we forget about God. That's why my personal testimony is, I'm actually afraid when I'm being blessed. If there's blessing that comes to me, like whether it's material or whatever, I'm scared because I know it's a test, Lord, that I may not forget you. If you're being tried, the tendency, don't forget God. Is there a prayer meeting, Pastor? I want to attend prayer meeting. Diba? And then you start to criticize the church, wala kayong prayer meeting. When we are in deliverance, enjoying the prosperity, the tendency is we forget. Now, the book of Judges is a reflection of who we are today. Okay? Are we ready? Now, let's jump into chapter 6, verse 1. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. Again, you see the first and second cycle. They started to disobey God because they were prosperous. Now, God disciplined His people for 7 years. Now, the Midianites are nomads. They would just settle there in tents wherever they would settle. And the Midianites with the Amalekites and the other eastern nation would ally themselves together and attack Israel, raid Israel. And the description of the book of Judges, they are like locusts. You know, when they raid Israel, their camels, talaga pong they would, sabi nga ng chapter 6, they would get their livestock, they would get their horses, all the animals, and leave Israel devastated and desolate. For 7 years, they would attack and raid Israel. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. Now, I was wondering, bakit pa kayo naghintay ng 7 years? When we are disobeying, sometimes there's pride. Kaya natin to. Pananagutan ko na to kasi ginawa ko to eh. 7 years passed and they cried to the Lord because God is merciful. You know, God is merciful. He responded to them by sending them a prophet. When they cried out to the Lord because of the Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites, unknown man. And he said, maybe that man stood up somewhere and started shouting to the Israelites, this is what the Lord, the God of your Israel says, I brought you out of the slavery in Egypt. Don't forget, God, I am the God. Remember, I gave you this land. Look, what God would say, I rescue you from all the Egyptian and all those who oppress you. I drove your enemies and gave you their land. God is saying, don't forget the reason why you're in Canaan, enjoying the land flowing with milk and honey, simply because I gave you this land. I told you I am the Lord your God. I want you to feel the emotion of God here. I told you, you must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live, but you have not listened to me. So this is now the cause of why devastation came to Israel. Most of the time, kaya tayo naghihirap at nagkakaroon ng problema ang buhay natin, nagkapalpak, simply because of our own disobedience. There's a formula in the Bible, in the Old Testament, obedience results to blessing, and disobedience results to devastation. God was so hurt to His own people. Para bang, ito na nga, tinulungan ko na kayo, I've redeemed you, and this is what I'll get in return. Disobedience was the reason why they were in that situation. Now, in the midst of this situation, the angel of the Lord appeared. Now, because they cried out for help, God sent the angel of the Lord. God would manifest in human form during those times just to call and raise His deliverer. You know, if you don't know that God has a sense of humor, this is the portion that you will say, God has a sense of humor. God appeared to Gideon. Gideon was, the son of Joash, a farmer, and he was at the bottom of the winepress. Not at the bottom, but where there's wind, so that when you trust the wind will blow and the chaff will be blown away. So, can you imagine he was doing that at the bottom of the winepress because he was afraid that the Midians would see him and oy, mayroon palang palay. They would raid him again. They were fearful for 7 years. This is the 8th times he was hiding there and threshing and hiding and coward. I can understand Gideon. Look at this. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." I can imagine Gideon was full of dirt and was saying, are you talking to me? Mighty hero? Now, here, maybe God is exaggerating, but, you know, sometimes tayo lang ang walang bilib sa sarili natin. Eh. God can see a hero inside of us. What an encouraging word. Mighty hero, the Lord is with you. And here comes Gideon reasoning out to God. At first, he didn't realize that he was talking to God. Gideon said, "Lord, if you are with us, if what you're saying is true, then why is these things happening to us? And where are all the miracles from the ancestors, the stories of our forefathers? I only hear stories that He dried the Jordan River, He provided all these things. Those are just stories. If this is true, why are we in desolation? Why are we being attacked by the Midianites? Didn't they say the Lord brought us out of Egypt?" Apparently, Gideon was not there when the prophet was speaking. He did not hear. But how the Lord abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. So Gideon was reasoning out his scenario here. Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go." This is interesting. I want you to pay attention to this. The Lord turned to him and said to Gideon, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." Now, I was expecting God would tell Gideon, "Gideon, don't worry, I will overshadow you, and you would feel in your vein such enormous power, and you will become mighty avenger." I was expecting that. But Gideon, he did not receive any superpower. But God said, "Gideon, with what you have, go with the strength that you have." Parang sinasabi ng Lord sa atin, "Anak, you don't have to be beaten by a spider to do such extraordinary thing. With the strength that you have, go with it. Basta remember, I am sending you." That's the only thing that makes the difference. I am with you. Go with the strength you have. So there was no special stone that Gideon swallowed and he became Captain Marvel or whatever. There was no such magical thing that happened to Gideon. But Gideon replied, "Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest and the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in the entire family." Excuse upon excuse. Just like Moses. When God called Moses, He gave excuses. My reading here is that Gideon is trying to say, "Lord, how do you expect me to stand up? I am not influential. Even if I call and rally people to be my armies, they would not listen to me. I am the weakest. I am not influential in this society, in my locality." And look what God said to him. The Lord said to Gideon, "I will be with you." Look at the encouragement of God to Gideon. "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." There was no superpower. The only guarantee and promise is the presence of God. I would rather have the presence of God than anything in this world, because if I have the presence of God, even in times of trouble, God sustains me because of His presence. What would I do with prosperity and abundance if the presence of the Lord is not there? There's emptiness and there's no meaning with the prosperity. Even if I suffer, if the presence of God is with me, how comforting and encouraging it is kapag sinabi ng Diyos, I am with you. Go. I am. The same thing He said to Moses, go to Pharaoh. I am with you, Moses. And then Gideon said, excuse me, can you wait? Can you give me a sign? Can you wait here for a while? I'll just go home and prepare something as an offering to you. Maybe he realized he was talking to no longer to an ordinary man, but to an angel. Sabi ng angel of the Lord, okay Gideon, go. So uwi si Gideon. Pag uwi niya, nagdala siya after siguro 30 minutes, an hour, he brought some offering. Flour, wheat, bread, and a broth of stew or something. And then he said, this is my offering to you. And the angel of the Lord said, put it on the rock, Gideon. And then Gideon placed the offering on the rock, and the angel of the Lord with his staff touched the offering, and fire came out from that rock and consumed it. And you know the realization ni Gideon, nung nakita niya, sabi niya, I am doomed. I have seen God face to face. You know, they have this kind of understanding that when you encounter God face to face, you die. Because God is holy. I am doomed, for our sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. And right away, God responded, it's all right, Gideon. The Lord said to him, do not be afraid. You will not die. These words are encouragement to a young believer, to a young follower, Gideon. All of a sudden, God appeared to him and He was calling him for such a huge task. It's all right, Gideon. And you know, the response of Gideon is, he built an altar at that portion, at that moment, and dedicate the altar as the Lord is Shalom. Meaning, finally, because God's presence is with us, there will be peace in this land. That same night, interesting happened because Gideon already believed in God. The Lord said, I want you to pull down the altar of your father that is dedicated to Baal. You know, Baal is one of the gods of the Canaanites, the Amalekites. Baal, if you Google it, it has something to do as a god of agriculture. Maybe they have this kind of, pagpalain mo naman ang pananim namin, ang kaduryanan namin, they would offer to this Baal god. Eh kung itong God na Baal na totoo, di bakit may mga nag-raid ng mga Midianites and they would leave them devastated? Apparently, the father of Gideon, Joash, built an altar. Maybe because of they forgot about God and built this altar with an Asherah pole beside it, another god. The Lord said, Gideon, I want you to destroy the altar of your father that is dedicated to Baal, and I want you to make another altar for me. You know what Gideon did? So Gideon took 10 of his servants. Take note, 10 servants? Gideon's family was a bit well off. May servants siya. Sabi ni Gideon sa mga boys niya, boys, come to me. Come with me. Let's do something for God. Maybe they don't know what's gonna happen. And Gideon did it at night. Sabi niya doon sa 10 boys, destroy this. Maybe the servants were saying, how can we destroy this? This is the God Baal. And Gideon said, no, destroy this. Destroy. Because they're obedient to their boss, they destroyed the altar, and Gideon made another altar and sacrificed another bull. The following day, that was evening. The following day, ito na yung mga local people sa town. In the morning, they would offer and say hi to their gods. Lord, good morning. Maybe they're saying to give the Baal. They were surprised that the altar of Baal has been destroyed and another altar was dedicated to Yahweh. And they were saying, they were so indignant, and they searched all the land in their locality. Who did this? After searching carefully, maybe one of the 10 servants squealed. It's Gideon. And listen very carefully. This is the interesting dialogue. Joash shouted to the mob outside that confronted him, why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Will you argue the case of your God? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar. Tama naman, ano? This is the resolution. From that then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal. Let Baal defend himself because he broke down the altar. When they gave Gideon the name Jerubbaal, it's actually cursing him. Let Baal destroy you. But after many days, nothing happened to Gideon. We all know, because Baal is just a wood or a carved stone. The only true God is the living God who redeemed them from Israel. Sometimes we have this false God, which, you know, idolatry is when you give your trust to someone else other than God. It can be a work, it may not be a wooden statue, it may not be something, or it can be someone, it can be our job. Where do you put your trust? That's a God. That's a God, small g, that cannot defend you. So after this event, there was a pause, a long pause. The Midianites gathered again together and trying to attack again Israel at that time. Now, here comes an interesting part. The Spirit of the Lord took possession of Gideon. Now, the translation in the New Living Translation, took possession does not mean na pinuses si Gideon. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, or in other words, clothed him, enabled him. As a result, Gideon raised the trumpet and called for soldiers. He called the trumpet, sounded the trumpet, and he was able to rally soldiers from different tribes. He was able to gather 32,000 foot soldiers. Nasasama sa kanya. This is interesting. So 32,000 warriors. At night, he called upon God again and he said, Lord, I have one more request. Sabi niya, Lord, just to give me assurance. The following morning, Lord, if the fleece is wet and the surrounding is dry, in the morning because of the dew, it means you have given us the victory. And God gave into Gideon's demand or the sign. The following day, Gideon looked at, in the morning, he saw the fleece, the parts of the wools of the sheep. It's wet and the surrounding is dry. Wow! Sabi ni Gideon, sabi niya, Lord, one more thing, please don't get mad at me. Tomorrow, Lord, balik rin naman natin. This is dry, everything will be wet. And true enough, God again did it. And Gideon realized that God was with him. So what did Gideon do? He raised his army and let's go up early to the mountain and they were going to attack on the battlefield. Now, 32,000 came to Gideon. And this is interesting. When they were marching near the battlefield, you know what happened? The Lord said to Gideon, Gideon, how many soldiers do you have, warriors? 32,000, Lord. Against 135,000. Kukunti na nga eh. You have too many warriors. I will not let it happen. Why? Because if you defeat them, I know these people, these are hard-headed people. I know them that they will boast and say, oh, we defeated because of our own strength. Sabi ng Lord, no. Tell them now. Tell the Israelites, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain. Interesting exercise. Gideon stood up somewhere in a pedestal and he said to the soldiers, soldiers, I have good news. Whoever is afraid, timid, yung mga napilitan lang at naitulak, I have a good news for you. You can go home. I can imagine I'm one of the soldiers and said, finally answered prayer tayo. Oy, ilan anak mo? 4, ako 3, uwi na tayo. Diba? It's just practicality, no? God knows. 22,000 of them went home. Imagine if you're Gideon. 32,000 against 135, iiwan ka pa ng 22. Pero that's good because the 22 hindi mo maasahan. Pag sabi mo, attack! Pabalik sila. Di ba yung, Pastor, nasa likod mo ako. Huwag ka magalala, nasa likod mo ako para itulak ka. Sabi ni Lord, ilan natira Gideon? I only have 10,000, Lord. But no complaint from Gideon. No complaint. You know why? Because one step at a time, encouragement leads to another obedience still. And Gideon was gaining momentum and encouragement from Yahweh. Sabi ng Lord, 10,000, madami pa rin. Are you kidding? Lord, are you kidding? Another exercise, bring them to the stream of waters. Sabi ni Gideon, okay guys, before we attack, let's drink water at the stream. So the 10 soldiers went to the stream and drank from the water. Galing ng Lord, ano? Tingnan nyo. Observe. Yung dalawang grupo, the other ones would step down and drink with their mouth on the water. Yan yung mga hindi ready yan. Yung mga pupugutan ng ulo yan kasi they don't look at the enemy. Lord, what will I do? Look at the people who are, the soldiers who would get the water with their hands and lap it like the dog. Put red on their forehead. Akin na lang yun. Tanda. Put a mark on them. And after the exercise, the Lord said, count them. Sabi ni Gideon, 300. 300 na lang. Look at this verse. The Lord told Gideon, with the 300 men, 9,700 ang ganun uminom. They are not alert. Galing ni Lord, no? This exercise, sabi ng Lord kay Gideon, 300, that's enough. Lord, 135,000. This is what I realize. Listen carefully. When less is more, this is the actual situation. Sa Bible, unlike in the world, majority wins, di ba? Where God is, if God is on your side, you are the majority. Gideon, I am with you. That's enough. Because that's the determining factor. If God is with me, even if I'm alone, against 135,000, I am the majority. And I am the winning team. No, it doesn't mean na, Pastor, mas madami sila o tama sila. No. Not necessarily. If God is with you, you are the majority. Gideon learned that it is not in the strength of the armies that he has. 300, that's enough. And you know, ito pa nakakatawa, sabi ni Gideon, okay Lord, what's next? Then give them torches, give them flashlights, and jar, and trumpet. Lord, are we going to battle, or are we going to symphony orchestra? Makikipagyera sila, may trumpet pa. Anong gagawin natin with torches and pitcher? Sabi ng Lord, just watch, Gideon. Just watch. But that night, interesting happened. God gave him a sign. Ito nakakatawa. Sabi ng Lord kay Gideon, that night, the Lord said, get up, Gideon. Go down to the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. I want you to listen. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. Maybe this is his assistant. Listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack. So baba si Purah at saka si Gideon, a valiant soldier, si Purah. When they were there at the camp of the Midian, it was time to change guards. And these two guards, standing there, sabi ng isa, pare, what's bothering you? Sabi niya, pare, nagkaroon akong panaginip kagabi. Dream. Actually, bangungot eh. What happened? I dreamed of a big loaf of bread tumbling down from the mountain, coming to us. Sabi niya, ano nangyari pare? It hit one of our tents, and the tents collapsed. Sabi, what is the meaning of the dream? Guard sila. Nakikinig si Gideon tsaka si Purah. They were listening. These two guards were pretending to be strong, but already shaking and melting in fear. And the other guard said, pare, isa lang ang ibig sabihin niyan. Hindi natin kaya si Gideon. Sipo mo, bread lang eh. Tumba na tayo. For me, that's an encouragement of God for Gideon. You know, one step obedience leads to encouragement. And encouragement leads to greater obedience still. And little do you realize that in your one-step obedience, when you look back, you have gone so far and you have accomplished great things, extraordinary things for God. When Gideon heard about the dream and its interpretation, right away he rallied the soldiers. Get up, for the Lord has given you victory over the Midianites. Anong ginawa ni Gideon? Strategy. Divided the 300, 100, 100, 100. There's 100 soldiers with him. At sabi niya, follow my lead. If you see me break the jar, all together we break the jar, surrounding the Midianites, and everybody blow the trumpet and raise the light. The Lord caused confusion. You know, everybody siguro yung mga tulog na alimpungatan, you know, I don't know the English for the alimpungatan. Although some portion of it fled, and yet Gideon was able to catch them and destroy them. God has given victory to Gideon with the torch, the trumpet, and the jar. Amazing. After the story, the people say, Gideon, let you be our king. And Gideon said, no. I will not be your king. For 40 years, Gideon ruled as the judge of Israel. What's the lesson here? Is it all about deliverance? Is it all deliverance? You know, some people misinterpreted Gideon's action in setting out the fleece. Many, probably you have heard the story of Gideon. It is being used. You know, people would say, if you're searching for God's will, bring out the fleece. Ask for a sign. Now, mga kapatid, just to make a clarification here, Gideon was not doing it for the sake of knowing God's will. He already knew the will of God. He was asking for a sign for encouragement. Not because he doubted. Kailangan ni Lord, you know, every step of the way, He would encourage Gideon, I am with you, Gideon. Don't worry, Gideon. One step at a time. I am with you. You know what? He already gathered the armies before he asked for the sign. Remember? He already gathered 332,000 before he asked, Lord, please encourage me. Why? In fairness with Gideon, Gideon was a new convert. He rose to the occasion. He was raised by God in a time of difficulty, and he was there willing. Kagaya din natin, Lord, hindi ko alam, Lord. Abraham, follow me, Abraham. Go to the land I will show you. Which one, Lord? Just follow me, one step at a time. Because when God calls you, He will not ask you, can you commit 100 steps for me? No. God would say, Anak, just give me one step, and that's enough for me. One step at a time obedience. Because our obedience to God leads to encouragement. And encouragement leads to greater obedience still. Look at this. Gideon's experience reminds us that we ought to obey God without demanding signs. Although, while God may give signs to encourage us, He gives them to those who trust and have obeyed rather than to those who doubt. Yes, you can ask God's sign, but God is not obliged to fulfill it. I believe the focal point in the story of Gideon was not about the deliverance. It is all about the person and the faith of Gideon. Telling us, if God is calling you, asking you to do something, anak, don't be afraid. Just give God one step at a time. Obedience. Gideon's experience reminds us that God leads us one step at a time. Gideon hardly knew from his first encounter with God that he would be expected to face the 135,000 Midianites with a mere 300 soldiers. If there's one lesson I want you to bring home, this is it. Our obedience to God leads to encouragement. It is when we obey that we are encouraged. And that same encouragement that God would give us would lead us to greater obedience. Don't mind. One step at a time. Little you will realize when you look back, you won't believe it, that God was able to accomplish great things in your life by simply one step at a time. Obedience. Kumusta, mga kapatid? Kumusta po kayo? I don't know what's going on in your life, but again, the totality of Christian life is all about obeying God. When you read the Bible in the morning in your devotion, God speaks to you. One step at a time. Don't be afraid to follow God. Whatever it is. If God is calling you, give Him. If you can give Him half step, give Him. Because God, for Him, that is enough. I would end with this verse, Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. It reminds me, Apostle Paul, sabi ni Paul, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You know, that verse can be translated as, I can do all things, whatever God is demanding from me, asking me, through Christ who gives me the courage, who encourages me. Maybe for some of us, this is our memory verse, but don't miss this. Paul did not say, he can do all things. No. He said, I can do all things. Remember Gideon, go with the strength that you have. Go with the strength that you have. That's enough, anak. Ang strength mo, 1/4 na lang. Just go with that strength. And don't worry, as one step of obedience, I will be there to give you courage, to gain momentum. Don't be afraid. At the end of the day, we can say, I can do it. We cannot say, kaya ni Lord. Di ba pag may problema, kaya ni Lord yan. Next time baguhin nyo, kaya mo yan. Don't forget, God is with you. That's the greatest encouragement you will ever have. Sumasa iyo ang Diyos. If God is with you, nothing can be against you.